Hello, I'm Foxcade. You may remember me from PSAs such as the Persona Waifu Wars, How Many Must Die, and Souls Anonymous, How to Stop Comparing Everything to Dark Souls. And I'm here today to talk to you about yet another serious epidemic currently happening in video games that is not being addressed in the mainstream. Every day, thousands of monsters are being needlessly hunted in the new world of Monster Hunter World. From great Jagresses to Bathrosts to Rathalos, entire populations of monsters are being decimated. Starting in the tranquil ancient forests to the charming Rotten Vale, hunters are invading these fragile ecosystems en masse, disrupting the delicate balance of the environment and causing wanton destruction across the land by killing these majestic creatures and rapidly draining resources as they mine for ore, pick flowers, and gather dung during these savage quests. Now, for a long time, monster hunting had been a relatively niche hobby, mostly being popular in areas like Japan and with certain groups in the West. But this problem has only gotten more and more prevalent over the last couple months, with Monster Hunter World recently becoming Capcom's best-selling game in history, meaning the amount of people hunting down monsters has only been steadily increasing. And this goes deeper than you might think. We have confirmation that major video game icons like Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn and Ryu from the acclaimed Street Fighter series have been involved with this underground world of monster hunting. Sources also have told us that Samus from Metroid and Big Boss from Metal Gear have been involved with these operations too, but don't yet have confirmation of it. At this point, who knows how far this whole thing goes and who else might be involved. We reached out to these figures for comment on these accusations, but their representatives have not yet responded. Though this footage of Ryu brutally slicing up this group of harmless Gyruses like sashimi says more than enough. As you can see, poor defenseless kaiju are being needlessly slaughtered by the heinous actions of these hunters. Now I ask, who are the real monsters here? Clearly, this is an issue that is of much concern and needs to be resolved. But before we can address the problem, we must first understand what is really going on here. And most importantly, why monster hunting has gotten so popular as of late. So in order to investigate the seedy world of monster hunting properly, I went undercover, under the guise of being an A-list hunter with his Palico pal, into the new world. And what I found was shocking. When first arriving in Astera, the main hunting village in the new world, probably the most surprising thing I found in this rather primitive society was the plethora of weapons you were presented with to hunt down monster populations. And this is where we see the first thing that keeps people interested in hunting time after time. Between great and long swords that do your basic sword type things, to lances combined with guns that let you do explosive combos, to hunting horns that grant buffs to your hunting team's stats, to heavy bowguns that have an abundance of different ammo types for different monsters, there is a huge amount of weapons that hunters can choose from for their hunts. And this isn't even mentioning the amounts of armors that the game has on top of this. The sheer number of weapons, along with the variety of stats, the sharpness, the elemental types, and skills that have to be taken account for depending on what is being hunted, is a joy if you're the type of hunter that loves being spoiled for choice in terms of weaponry and seeing numbers go up. However, it can also be a bit overwhelming at first too, since a new hunter doesn't want to use the wrong type of weapon or something that is difficult to use. In the end though, it mostly comes down to each hunter's particular hunting style, until they get to high rank and aggressively need to pay attention to what they're using. Though by then, most hunters have already invested quite a bit of time into hunting these monsters and have a grasp on it, or they research heavily into the Wikia. Beyond that, every weapon type has its own unique movesets that take some time to learn as well. But once you start to understand them, there are a lot of stylish moves that you can do with these weapons on hunts, like doing a spinning slash attack down a monster's back with the dual blades if it follows a slide movement, or the fully loaded Charge Blades elemental discharge combo, which honestly feels pretty satisfying to connect with. Though learning those types of moves has a slight learning curve compared to your basic sword movesets. But that's part of the appeal to most hunters. The amount of mechanics and combos that need to be learned to effectively hunt makes monster hunting feel more like a fighting game than an RPG, where you're learning the most effective ways to fight and what combos are good for when. Except your opponent is a giant monster 3 times your size that you have come to kill. Admittedly, there is a lot of nuance that makes the combat of Monster Hunter really engaging once you get into it. But the question is, does this justify harming perfectly harmless monsters? Just because you have cool weapons and movesets to use, do you have to go and attack these poor, innocent creatures in order to show how powerful you are? If you want to use these weapons so badly, there are perfectly good barrels you can hit in the training area. Why do you have to use them to bash a Bareth's skull in? And that leads to another morally questionable aspect of Monster Hunter World, and that is the hunting itself. Unlike other games, where you have random encounters that are presented as self-defense, even if you are asking for it just like that, Monster Hunter requires hunters to actively track down and hunt their prey throughout specific habitats, looking for tracks and markings in order for their scout flies to hone in on the monster's exact coordinates. Each location isn't just arenas for fights with monsters, except the one that is literally an arena, but living ecosystems with their own inhabitants and systems. And the fact hunters need to go out and actively search for their targets makes hunting a much more involved and engaging process compared to your standard action RPG, and really feels like they're hunting down something living, which is why these hunts are so questionable. In most RPGs and action games, enemies only exist during random encounters with the player character, or they perpetually stand in one place until someone steps into their pre-assigned area and they're aggroed into fighting. With Monster Hunter though, each monster is constantly moving throughout the map, eating and sleeping in their nests, and even fighting with other monsters over turf, until they are disturbed by hunters. Capcom went out of their way to make each monster look and act like its own distinct type of creature that feels like something that is truly living, and not simply just a pile of polygons. And the player is tasked with going in and killing those creatures, even when they're trying to limp away once they're weakened, which makes it depressing when you see these hunters still continuing to attack these vulnerable beasts. Many monsters don't even attack unless they're threatened first, or something invades their territory, both things that make the hunter the aggressor during these fights. In a lot of ways, the monsters are only a few steps removed from the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus, in that they are both perfectly fine with being left alone. Except the monsters don't have tragic sounding music for when they die. And that is the sad thing. These aren't aliens invading your planet or a terrorist splinter cell group that you need to defend your country from. These are creatures that are just living their lives in the forest or desert that you're hunting down like you're Liam Neeson in Taken.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
When a hunter is asked to hunt a Kuliyaku in order to complete a quest, the game never presents the monster as being an active threat. It's just a big dumb chicken dinosaur that likes to scrounge through the forest for jugs. And in fact, the hunters are the ones impeding on its territory. But the mission quest says it's gotta be killed, so I guess it's time for some fried chicken. And it's not just the big game that is vulnerable either. Even the common wildlife found throughout the different habitats aren't safe from the hunter's bloodthirst and cruelty. Forget Undertale, this is the real genocide run. Fortunately though, the biggest thing preventing hunters from killing these monsters, beyond tough to navigate menus and slow weapon sharpening animations, is that each monster has their own ways of defending themselves. Along with having very lifelike movements and designs, every monster has their own unique defense mechanisms for fending off threats, which again reinforces how much these feel like real animals that these hunters are fighting. Tobi-Kadachi can climb up trees to pounce on its enemies, where Rathalos has strong sweeping fire attacks, and Paolumu can do drop attacks from the air like a big furry anvil. The problem, though, is that this just simply made the monsters a more interesting prey for a lot of hunters, as they now have a challenge to overcome, leading to hunters having to actively study the movements of the monsters and even researching into the species in order to better hunt them and target their weaknesses, like cutting off their tails so they can't use them to fight back, or just unfairly ganging up on the monsters with multiple hunter friends. And it's not as if the hunters don't have time to consider what they're doing, since another distinguishing part of monster hunting is the amount of prep that is involved. Because there is so much variety to the monsters and areas, there's equally a need to account for this with the different items and armors a hunter needs to bring, whether it's antidotes to counter poison, or a need for pitfall traps for tougher monsters. So before a hunter runs off for another hunt, they first need to stock up on potions, craft any antidotes, flashbangs, and traps they might need for what they're hunting, and get a nice meal at the canteen, because you shouldn't go killing monsters on an empty stomach. Though, with the amount of prep that is involved, that means these hunters are given plenty of time to consider their actions. Is Capcom subtly trying to give these hunters a moment to reflect on what they're doing while they scarf down the meal the Palago chef made for them? Or are they equally complicit in these premeditative assaults? And that leads us to the biggest question of all. What is the point of these hunts? Why are hunters and palicos compelled to track and kill these monsters? Is it a tribalistic test of strength? Is it to keep monster populations low as a form of conservation? Is it to protect humanity from some kind of looming kaiju attack? No, it's simply to get better equipment so that they can better hunt more monsters. Beyond this, there's no other real drive that justifies these hunts. There's a tacit story that the Research Commission has put out about having to figure out why Zora Magdaros has come to the New World, though even that centers around shooting the Elder Dragon type monster in the face and stabbing it with a giant lance for it to leave the island that it came to die on. The real main focus of the game is the gameplay loop that it is built around, which is an endless cycle of hunting down monsters, breaking off parts of their body during the hunt and looting their corpses, making more equipment with said parts, then hunting bigger and stronger monsters in newer areas to get better equipment, rinse and repeat. And it says something about these hunters that they're willing to slowly kill these gentle creatures just so that they can get that new outfit for their palico, even if it is quite fabulous. It's an addicting feedback loop driven by constant challenge and reward, with death being a frequent byproduct, whether that is the hunters or the monsters. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. We can put an end to this vicious cycle of death and violence. So in collaboration with the Coalition of Colossi Rights and the Android Machine Unity project, I'm happy to announce the formation of Hunters for the Ethical Capture of Monsters. For too long, monsters have been the unknowing participants to the questionable actions of the hunters, whether it's being used for weapon material, as a source of entertainment in the arena, or just as a form of transportation. And this needs to stop, as they are living digital beings just like the hunters and palicos. And that is why HECMO was formed, so that we can work towards a future that sees monsters having the same rights as hunters. And maybe together, we can create a world where hunters, palicos, and monsters can live in harmony. Man, I don't get paid enough for this shit. Hey, who's down for a Zora hunt? I only need one more high rank drop to finish my set.